What you are about to hear is not a traditional Sunday school story. Forget the majestic paintings of a brave man standing calmly in a den of hungry lions. Forget the image of a fearless hero who looked kings in the eye without blinking. The reality of the greatest prophet in biblical history is far darker and far more tragic. If you turn to the 8th chapter of the book of Daniel, specifically the 27th verse, you will find a chilling confession that scholars rarely talk about. He wrote, "I, Daniel, was exhausted and lay ill for several days. I was appalled by the vision, and it was beyond understanding." Think about the psychological weight of those words for a second. This is a man who survived slavery, a man who watched empires rise and burn to the ground, a man who stared death in the face and did not flinch. Yet, something he saw in the quiet of the night completely shattered his mind. It caused his nervous system to collapse. It left him physically paralyzed, sweating, and bedridden for many days. What exactly did he see? What kind of cosmic horror is capable of breaking the mental fortitude of a prophet? Today, we are going to open the Doomsday dossier. We are going to conduct a psychological autopsy on the most terrifying vision ever recorded in human history. Because what Daniel saw was not just a nightmare. It was a preview of the bleeding future of humanity. When we talk about trauma, modern psychology usually points to physical threats, violence, or near-death experiences. If a lion is standing in front of you, your brain releases cortisol and adrenaline. You either fight or you run. That is a normal biological response to a physical threat. Daniel handled physical threats perfectly. But what happened to him after his visions was completely different. He suffered from what we can only describe as cosmic trauma. Imagine your mind as a fragile glass vessel. It is designed to hold a certain amount of information about your daily life, your family, your job. Now imagine someone taking the entire ocean of time, all the wars, all the blood, all the empires that will ever exist, and pouring it into that small glass vessel all at once. The glass does not just overflow. It shatters into a million pieces. That is exactly what happened to Daniel. His brain was forced to process an apocalyptic reality that human biology is simply not equipped to handle. He was pulled out of his physical surroundings and thrown into a void of absolute darkness. The comforting silence of his bedroom was replaced by the deafening roar of 4 winds crashing against a black, churning sea. In the ancient world, the sea always represented chaos, death, and the unknown. But this was not just a violent storm. The water began to boil. The fabric of reality tore open. And from the depths of that abyss, things began to crawl out. Daniel did not just see abstract symbols. He witnessed the grotesque, unnatural mutation of power. He felt the ground shake. He smelled the stench of death before it even happened. He was forced to stand there, completely helpless, as the terrifying blueprint of human destruction unrolled right before his eyes. The isolation of this trauma is perhaps the most heartbreaking part of his story. When you break your leg, people can see the cast. When you survive an earthquake, you rebuild with your neighbors. But when your mind is crushed by the weight of eternity, you suffer entirely alone. Daniel was surrounded by the immense wealth and noise of Babylon, yet he was trapped inside a solitary confinement of his own mind. The horrific images replayed in his head on an endless loop. The terrifying roars, the blood-stained teeth, the feeling of absolute insignificance in the face of cosmic annihilation. This was not a fear of dying. This was the agonizing realization of how humanity would violently tear itself apart, era after era, while he could do absolutely nothing to stop it. His physical illness, the days spent bedridden and feverish, was just the body trying to process an unbearable psychological burden. And the source of that burden was rising slowly from the dark waters of his shattered consciousness. To understand why he fell so ill, we cannot just read the text. We have to look directly at the monsters that broke him. We have to stare into the abyss that stared back at him. Every nightmare has a starting point. For Daniel, it started with the wind. In his vision, he was no longer standing in a luxurious Babylonian palace. He was suddenly standing on the shore of a vast, pitch-black ocean, the Great Sea. In ancient psychology, the dark ocean was the ultimate symbol of chaos, a place where terrifying monsters dwell in the cold depths. Suddenly, the four winds of heaven violently crashed into the water, churning the sea into a boiling nightmare. This was not a natural storm. This was the spiritual atmosphere of Earth reacting to the sheer violence of human ambition. And then, the water broke. The first entity to drag itself out of the black waves was a terrifying biological contradiction. It looked like a massive lion, but it possessed the wings of an eagle. Daniel watched in horror as this majestic beast was suddenly mutilated. Its wings were violently torn off. It was lifted from the ground and forced to stand on half feet like a man, and a human heart was shoved into its chest. This was the Babylonian Empire, a predator stripped of its natural glory and cursed with human vulnerability. But the terror had just begun. The water churned again, and a second monstrosity emerged. A colossal bear, unnaturally raised up on one of its sides, dragging its heavy, deformed weight. Gripped tightly between its crushing teeth were three massive, bloody ribs. It was a creature driven by pure, insatiable hunger. A voice from the dark abyss commanded it to get up and eat a massive amount of flesh. This was the Medo-Persian Empire, a brutal military machine that would soon swallow 3 entire nations, leaving behind mountains of corpses that would rot for many months. Before Daniel could even process the slaughter, a third abomination leaped from the freezing water. A leopard, incredibly fast and lethal, but horribly mutated. It had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 separate heads, all looking in different directions with the pure madness of a predator. This was the Greek Empire under Alexander, moving across the globe with terrifying, unnatural speed before splintering into 4 chaotic pieces that would wage war for many decades. The prophet's mind was already stretching to its absolute breaking point. The grotesque imagery, the metallic smell of blood, the deafening roars echoing across the water. But absolutely nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The sea split wide open, and the 4th beast ascended. Daniel could not even find a single earthly animal to compare it to. It was a nightmare made of iron and rage. It was terrifying, dreadful, and possessed overwhelming strength. Its massive iron teeth clamped down on everything in its path, tearing flesh and shattering bones. Whatever it did not eat, it violently trampled under its heavy bronze claws. This was the Roman Empire, and the horrific global systems of power that would follow it for thousands of years. A cold, calculated killing machine designed solely for domination and destruction. Crowning its grotesque head were 10 horns, shifting and moving like living weapons. And as Daniel watched, completely paralyzed by cosmic dread, a new, smaller horn grew among them. This small horn had the eyes of a man, eyes filled with cold, calculating intelligence, and a mouth speaking arrogant, blasphemous things against the universe itself. Imagine standing before this entity, a creature whose only purpose is to consume humanity and mock the heavens. Daniel was not just watching a vision. His fragile human mind was intimately connected to the suffering of the millions of people who would be crushed by these empires over the next thousands of years. The sheer weight of this future violence was shutting down his nervous system. The darkness was absolute. The beast was roaring in victory. The end of the world seemed inevitable. But just as his sanity was about to snap completely under the weight of this doomsday machine, the dark sky above the boiling ocean suddenly tore open. Just when the darkness seemed absolute and the iron teeth of the fourth beast threatened to consume the entire world, the sky above the churning ocean ripped wide open. The deafening roars of the mutated monsters were suddenly swallowed by a sound that shook the very foundations of the universe. Daniel was forcefully pulled away from the earthly chaos. His vision violently shifted, tearing through the fabric of space and time, bringing him into a realm of blinding, almost unbearable light. This was not the gentle, peaceful heaven that modern stories often describe. This was the ultimate cosmic courtroom, and the supreme judge of the universe was taking his seat. Daniel looked upon a figure so terrifyingly majestic that it defied all human comprehension. He called him the Ancient of Days. His clothing was as brilliantly white as newly fallen snow, radiating a purity that exposed every shadow. The hair on his head was like the purest wool. But it was the throne that completely shattered any earthly concept of royal authority. The throne itself was not made of gold or marble. It was constructed entirely of blazing fire, and its wheels were roaring, swirling flames. From beneath this throne, a massive river of liquid fire flowed outward, sweeping across the cosmic floor like a tidal wave of absolute justice. This was not a fire that merely burned physical objects. This was a spiritual fire, a consuming force designed to eradicate corruption, cruelty, and the arrogance of the earthly empires. Standing before this river of fire were thousands upon thousands of angelic beings. 10,000 times 10,000 celestial entities stood in silent, terrified reverence before the judge. That is 100 million angels, an army of light so vast that it stretched beyond the limits of Daniel's shattered vision. The court was seated, and the books of judgment were finally opened. Down below, the fourth beast with its iron teeth and its boastful little horn was still screaming its arrogant words into the void. It thought it was the ultimate power. It thought it had conquered the world for thousands of years. But in the phase of the Ancient of Days, the beast was absolutely nothing. There was no epic, drawn-out battle. There was no struggle between good and evil. The destruction of the beast was swift, brutal, and absolute. Daniel watched as the terrifying monster that had paralyzed him with fear was simply slain. Its body was destroyed and thrown directly into the blazing river of fire, consumed in a fraction of a single second. The other beasts, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, had their authority completely stripped away, allowed to live only for a brief moment longer before they too would fade into nothingness. The sheer scale of this transition is what truly broke Daniel's mind. He had just witnessed the most horrifying display of evil imaginable, only to be immediately confronted by a display of divine power that was infinitely more overwhelming. The Ancient of Days did not negotiate. He did not fight. He simply existed, and his very presence eradicated the darkness. And then, approaching the blazing throne on the clouds of heaven, came one like a son of man, a human figure, yet wrapped in divine glory, walking directly into the consuming fire without being burned. He was led into the presence of the Ancient of Days, and to him was given ultimate authority, glory, and a sovereign power over every nation, every language, and every single person on earth. His kingdom would be the only empire that would never be destroyed. For a moment, Daniel saw the ultimate victory. He saw the end of all suffering and the establishment of a perfect, eternal reign. But the overwhelming contrast between the bloody, violent history of humanity and the terrifying, burning purity of the cosmic court was simply too much for his physical body to handle. His nervous system was completely overloaded by the raw, unfiltered truth of the universe. He had stared directly into the blinding light of eternity, and the sheer weight of that reality would soon send him collapsing back into the darkness of his own physical frailty. The final piece of this psychological puzzle is exactly what happens after the fire fades and the cosmic court is closed. When the horrifying vision finally ended, Daniel did not ascend into the clouds of heaven with the Ancient of Days. The blinding light disappeared, and the deafening roar of the ocean went completely silent. Daniel woke up. He opened his eyes in the pitch-black darkness of his own bedroom. His heart was pounding violently against his ribs, and his entire body was drenched in a cold, trembling sweat. He was utterly exhausted, completely drained of every ounce of physical and mental energy. The biblical record in chapter 8 states clearly that he collapsed and was paralyzed by a mysterious sickness for many days. This is the invisible trauma we have been investigating. This is the Doomsday dossier. The supreme judge of the universe had shown him the ultimate, eternal victory of the light, but that victory was separated from his present reality by thousands of years of unimaginable human suffering. Daniel had to carry the knowledge of all those mutated beasts. He had to remember the iron teeth tearing through human flesh, the crushing of entire nations, and the literal oceans of blood that would inevitably be spilled across the chapters of human history. To know that humanity would violently tear itself apart, era after era, and to be completely powerless to stop it, is a psychological burden that no human being was ever designed to carry. Imagine the crushing, suffocating weight of that reality. After those many days of debilitating sickness, the prophet was forced to get out of bed. He had to wash his face, put on his heavy royal robes, and walk right back into the luxurious Babylonian court. He had to sit across the long wooden tables from kings, commanders, and powerful generals. He had to nod, smile, and perform his daily duties as a high-ranking government official. But every single time he looked at their faces, he knew exactly what their mighty empires were destined to become. He saw the ghosts of the future standing right behind them. He saw the iron teeth waiting in the shadows to tear their legacy apart. The true tragedy of the prophet Daniel is not that he saw the terrifying end of the world. The true tragedy is that he had to continue living in his present day, completely alone with a dark secret that would have shattered the mind of any other person. He could not warn the people around him, because the vision was explicitly sealed until the time of the end. He was a man permanently trapped between the perfect, burning justice of heaven and the brutal, violent reality of the earth. He became a silent prisoner of time. This investigation proves that these ancient texts are not just a collection of scary monsters or a confusing timeline of historical events. This is a profound medical and psychological record of what happens when a fragile mortal mind is forcefully expanded to hold the immense weight of eternity. Daniel easily survived the dark den of hungry lions because those animals were merely a physical threat. They were a localized danger that could only touch his flesh. But the vision of the chaotic future was a cosmic threat, a complete dismantling of his understanding of reality that nearly destroyed his very soul. When we look at these ancient apocalyptic prophecies today, we should absolutely not read them as simple riddles or puzzles to be solved. We should remember the old man who paid the ultimate psychological price to deliver these warnings to us. He carried the crushing burden of tomorrow so that we could finally understand the absolute truth today. The next time you think of Daniel, do not just picture the fearless hero standing in the light. Picture the broken man who survived the end of the world in the dark confinement of his own mind. If you found this deep psychological investigation profound, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the hidden mysteries of ancient texts. We will continue to open the files that history desperately tried to keep closed.